Thank you. All right, so thank you very much, and thank you for joining this call. It's you're 12 hours ahead of me, so I'm probably more fresh than I am. So this is really a talk about the OWASP Threat Modeling Playbook. So why do we need a playbook for this? So really, threat modeling, and I think probably most of you are aware of this, is a foundational activity of secure software or creating secure products. And hopefully, if you've already done a threat model, you've noticed that doing one threat model in itself is not that hard to do. But the problem is when you want to scale this up as an activity or as a practice in your organization, then you'll soon notice that that is quite hard to do. So what we've done with Toreon, with our experience, so we've trained lots of people on threat modeling. We've created literally hundreds of threat models for our customers. What we've done is we've created that experience and vision, and we've combined that with OWASP best practices, and we've turned that into a threat modeling playbook, which helps organizations to start threat modeling not only as a one-off experience, but also really as a practice, and to mature that as a practice in an organization. And what I really want you to do with this is to try it out, to have a look at it, to download it, to apply it to your own practice, and to see how it works for you. And then to share your experience and your feedback with us as a community, for us to be able to create the next release of the threat modeling playbook. So that's what the talk really is about. And so when we go over the agenda, what I'll do in this half an hour is very quickly an introduction to threat modeling. But then why do we need a playbook? How do we cover the different steps of getting stakeholder buy-in, to embed this in your organization, train people, embed this in the processes, and make sure that obviously you support this with some technology. And then either the link is already here, you can already have a look if you want. We've shared this on GitHub. There's an OWASP project around this. And at the end, I believe there will be time for some short Q&A. Obviously, if you don't have time now, afterwards, I'll share with you some contact details. So in terms of threat modeling, what threat modeling is really about, it's the activity of identifying potential issues or findings in your software or application, and classifying and looking at these like risks and potential, I would say, impact on your application, and not only detecting these, but also managing these in your application. And that's really what the threat modeling is about. Now, why do we need that? Typically, threat modeling is part of a secure development lifecycle, where if you create software, you typically will have some design, build, test, and operational phase of your software. Typically, these will be iterations in Agile or DevOps or what have you. And in each of these stages in software, things potentially might go wrong, resulting in security issues. And this might be security configuration errors, which you would typically cover by providing configuration guidelines, by doing some scanning, maybe some application firewalling in place. But you also might have coding bugs being introduced in your code or being pulled in by code that you depend or build upon. So that's where coding guidelines, training, source code reviews, dependency checkings come into place. And these are all activities that we hopefully are aware of. But there's another set of issues like not covering security requirements or design flaws or architectural issues that are quite harder to cover with these activities, and where threat modeling comes into place. And that's where typically threat modeling is being applied. Typical threat modeling stages are to first, and this comes from Adam Shostak's, I would say, very popular book, and it's typically the Bible of threat modeling, is you first have to understand what you're threat modeling, yeah? What's the system that we're looking at here together with the team, and you typically will do that through diagramming, to have an understanding of what you're going to look at, what you're going to threat model, and to also scope what you're working on with your team. In the next stage, the second step is to identify aspects or things that can go wrong in your software, and these are findings or threats that are maybe not covered in your application. This is obviously the first and the second critical step, which you want to follow up with, okay, what are we going to do about these issues? What are the typical vulnerabilities that we might have in our software that we have controls for, or that we have mitigations for, or that we lack, or we don't have mitigations for? So there we'll come up with a list of issues or potential issues that we haven't covered, and we'll make a decision on what to do or not to do with those. Typically, you can either fix those, put it in the next release, or either also accept that there's risk in your application, which is perfectly fine. But with threat modeling, at least you know what you're doing. And as a last step, and as a follow-up step for the next, I would say, iteration, you validate what you've done. And what have you learned from this? And what did work, what did not work? And you start an iteration of improving your threat modeling of your application. So far, so good. That's what threat modeling is really about. And there's lots of benefits of doing this and doing threat modeling. One of the biggest major benefits that we've seen in practice is that you get people and a team on the same page about security. You get a shared vision after you've done a threat model with the people involved, with the developers, with the product owners, with the testers. Obviously, it will also provide awareness for people involved to really understand what might go wrong and what can we do about this. And in essence, obviously, threat modeling is about identifying those risks and assessing them and making sure that you address the biggest risk first, obviously to prevent design flaws. Based on that, you will be able to prioritize your resources, your time and energy into what can be fixed now, what can be fixed later, or what will be not fixed. But it provides you with a way to justify what you can and should do as a team or as a product owner, or as a business owner with the potential issues and design flaws in your application. And last but not least, certainly also, not only with GDPR, but with other, I would say, compliance frameworks, in most cases, you need to have some proof or some evidence that you have done your risk analysis, your technical risk analysis. And that's what the threat model really is. So if you have some trace, some artifact, and this might be even I would say, a photo of your whiteboard, what you've done, that will help you later on to justify that you've done your job at that, I would say, at that stage. So why aren't we all doing this? Well, there's quite some adoption constraints here. Typically, this will be requiring outside security expertise. This might be outside in the organization or even outside external help from external people. It might be taking some time. It's difficult also to reproduce across different teams and to compare threat models of different teams. Also what we've seen and what we experience is that tooling is definitely still limited. There's a growing tooling market around threat modeling, but it's still limited in functionality. And overall, it's hard to scale as an activity. So those are really constraints where, based on this and based on experience that what we have had so far with doing threat modeling in organizations and giving training around this, is that we need to level up our game. We need to become better at this, and not only individually, but as an organization and as a community to do this in a better way. Because we believe, and I truly believe that threat modeling is the step where we can mature our secure development practice overall. So what have we done? And this is an activity that we have done with our Toreon team over the summer period last year. And we couldn't go on holiday anyway, so what else could we do? So what we've done is we've taken our experience, and for instance, I personally also have been involved in a project called OWASP SAMM, which is about software assurance. There's a couple of security practices there related to threat modeling. We also have a lot of threat modeling expertise and best practices in the OWASP community. We have our own training experience, and there was one particular project within OWASP that we have, I would say, taken some lessons from. That's the Security Champions Playbook. And we thought a playbook approach would be interesting to see how we could implement threat modeling as a practice. And that's what we did and what we've produced. So in essence, And the playbook format is a really interesting format because it translates a vision and a strategy into a practical, step-by-step tactical approach. And that's what most organizations need. They don't need a fluffy strategy, or they don't need like well, obviously a book is great, but how are we going to do this? And a playbook is a really good format for that. Also, when you take the analogy with actual playbooks being used, for instance, American football, this is a really interesting comparison because it really depends on where you are as a product team. What are your strengths, your weaknesses of your software or your application? What stage are you in? So if you compare that to the stage of a game, where you typically also would have different threat modeling playbooks or playbooks. So it translates really well. Also, you have an offensive and a defensive motivations. And overall, in essence, gamification increases adoption. So if you explain this as a sort of game and a playbook to the teams involved, it will increase adoption. We've seen that with other aspects as well. So how does this work and how does it look like? So this is the threat modeling playbook overview. So what you'll see here is, and what I'm going to explain in the next couple of slides, is the different steps of doing this. There's two preparation steps. That's to make sure that you have some stakeholder buy-in, otherwise it's going to be quite hard. And the second step is to make sure that you can embed this in your organization, and more specifically in your risk management in your organization. Once you have that nailed down, those two steps, then we come into a typical, what we would call people, process, technology step. You first have to make sure that people get some proper training. You make sure that you have some integration with processes, and only then at the end will you improve and strengthen this with tooling. And that's how the threat modeling playbook really works. And what you see here are the steps in each of these stages that you can take. So what's the first and foremost thing to do is to make sure that you have stakeholder buy-in, that you identify who's going to be involved in your organization. The list is here, but make sure that you understand what their potential obstacles might be, what would be their gains for them, and that you make sure that they're convinced of the added value of threat modeling. Once you have done that, make sure that you also have a strategy to inject threat modeling expertise. And you have typically, either you can do it yourself, you hire an expert, or you do some threat modeling training, but make sure that you have a decent approach here, and then that you demonstrate also what you've done in sort of like return on investment. And this is by measuring the outcomes of threat models. Typically, when you start doing threat modeling, you should really make sure that everything gets visualized in terms of work, in terms of output, in terms of user stories, incidents related to your threat models. And what you'll see is threat model findings will go up in the beginning. Something else would surprise me would surprise me really. But in the end, deployment issues will go down because of a better understanding of the technical risks. Which means that once you have this stakeholder buy-in and you have a way to demonstrate this, that the second step here is to make sure that you embed this in your organization, and more specifically in the risk management process of your organization. And every organization has this. This might be very informal as a startup, or as a small team, but this might also be very formal and very well defined in bigger organizations. If you don't have this sort of process available within your organization, I would really, recommend to have a look at the ISO 27005 standard, which is a really good standard about information risk management. And what it does is, and what we've done is, we've linked this people process technology framework to this particular standard. So what we've done here, if I go back here, you see the different steps and the flows between the overall ISO standard. And what we've done is the people process technology steps that I'm going to explain in the next slide can be linked to a risk management process. And having that links and making sure that whatever you do as a technical risk analysis, which typically a threat model is, links back and feeds back into your risk register, risk process, how do you manage risk in your organization? is really the key to making sure that threat modeling will have an effect. You want to create an effect and impact with your threat model. Also making sure that from the beginning your threat model is linked to what your application means for your organization in terms of impact for your business. So that's key. So once you have that preparation step done, you go for the people, process, technology approach. And the first step is to make sure, obviously, again, make sure that who's going to be involved, what's going to be the motivation of each of the people and stakeholders in your threat modeling exercises, workshops, and these might be from your business, these might be architects, security champions, project managers, developers, but make sure that you have a good understanding who is going to be involved in your organization, and that you provide also them with a threat modeling specialist. So it really makes sense to have someone either internally or externally to your team within the organization be available to facilitate threat modeling, because it is essentially a specialist job to facilitate threat modeling, and all the rest of the team should be able to participate. And what we've done as part of the threat modeling playbook is we created a threat modeling specialist role. And so there's an explanation here. We have created some kind of like profile and what the responsibilities would be, typical tasks and some required skills and expertise. And here the idea is really to make sure that you have this kind of role in your organization, and also look out for specific candidates in your organization. What I've seen, certainly in bigger organizations, is typically this kind of threat modeling specialist will help a lot of different teams to get better at threat modeling. Also make sure that people who are involved, and this might be developers, product owners, others, get some decent basic understanding of what threat modeling is about. So have some minimal threat modeling training. What we've done here is we provided a list of what we think a good training, basic training should look like. It should cover these different aspects, but most and for all, it should include what we call hands-on expert exercises and how to apply this on your specific technology stack and your technology, and also how to embed this in your project governance. So that it is not something very generic, but apply this to your own, I would say, needs. And this is really critical because it's still a manual and something you need for people to have their, I would say, their thoughts and focus on. So they need to understand how to do this. Now, once you have that, the next step is to make sure that you embed this in your processes. And that's where threat modeling, specifically if you're in a stage of trying to improve and scale up your threat modeling process, you already have something in place. And probably you have something in place as a software development program. So here's a nice side way to, I would say, pitch the OWASP SAMM again, but it makes sense to look at what you're already doing. How does it look like? What's your threat modeling process now? What are you doing? When do you have already some inputs, output steps taken? And then map these on the playbook. And where are your gaps? What are you not doing compared with the playbook? And then go from there to improve your maturity. One of the key steps, what we see is important here, is that threat modeling is not done the same way for all applications in your portfolio. You'll have to do some, what I would say, create some like buckets of high, medium, low, and make sure that you do more threat modeling on your high risk applications versus medium or low risk applications. So order your applications into what we call risk buckets. Also, choose a methodology that works for you. There's lots of methodologies out there. Just make sure that it sounds. There's a couple of like prerequisites for a threat modeling methodology. It's listed in the threat modeling playbook when you have a look at it. There should be some traceability in there. It should obviously be scalable, otherwise it will definitely not make sense. And it should at least cover the 4-question framework that I described in the beginning. But most and for all, it's something that should fit your organization. If you're, I would say, creating a very specific physical object or IoT device or a SaaS service, typically threat modeling methodologies might be different. So choose something that works for you and try it out and see what works, and you even might adapt the methodology. So what's really important here, and what I already said in the beginning, is to fit or to link this with what we call your risk management framework. Because any threat model will have findings, will have like issues identified as part of your software. And the output of that will be risks combined with a threat actor, a vulnerability, a potential impact. And so you'll need to calculate this. And you need to translate the technical risk to a business risk. And a business risk typically will be something like that you can map on this kind of risk matrix, as an example here. So you should have an idea of your proper risk levels in your organization. Again, if you don't have this, and most organizations have at least mostly informal, embed this in some side code like ISO 27005 based risk process. But this is really the link towards, okay, what are we going to do this with this threat modeling practice? And that's the outcome. So the threat model outcomes will be a list of actions that you agree upon with your team, and that you make sure that someone takes responsibility for this. You should make sure that accountability is clear, and that you put a certain focus on fixing those agreed upon actions. Also that you have some kind of feedback loop. So what have you done in your next cycle? Were those done or not? Ideally, you in the next stage might even automate this. But this is I would say, the less exciting part about threat modeling, because threat modeling in itself is a really fun activity around a whiteboard, or even with a virtually, like remote meetings with a virtual whiteboard. But in essence, it's fun to do it. But important is that outcome of it is actionable, so that you agree upon what are you going to do with the findings. So optimize, as a last step, your methodology. Optimize your risk calculation. Make sure that also you hook into other security activities in your secure development lifecycle. This is really interesting for pen testing. You need to fit in compliance needs. This is really gold for a security test, or even automating it afterwards and doing awareness and so on. But also make sure that you have some way of aligning and comparing threat models between your teams. That's the best test to see if this methodology skills for you. So that's how it works in terms of process, and then it's only then that you should be looking at technology and selecting tools, and start with the basic steps and the basic tools first. A whiteboard, your brain, obviously in these times remote collaboration tools, but something that fits your needs, your methodology. So you don't tweak your methodology towards a tool, tweak the tool towards your methodology. And there's a growing market of open source and I would say even commercial tools. Make sure to have a good look at how those look like. The Threat Modeling Playbook has some kind of list of what you should look at. At least it should cover some risk documentation, input for other security activities, some kind of sharing of knowledge and so on. And as threats are, a threat model also contains quite some sensitive information around your software. Make sure there's access control and operational controls in place around this as well. So in the end, you want to integrate the tooling into your methodology so that even you can drive this further and go towards even what we would call threat modeling as code. And I would say the golden, I would say, or the end game should be that every time you have a major change in your software or your application, that there's automatically a trigger of, okay, do we need to review our threat model or not? And that you can embed this in your process. So that's in a very quick overview what the Threat Modeling Playbook is about. We put quite some energy and time into this as a threat modeling, as a team within Toreon. And then we really decided to open source this because we want to have an impact beyond our customer base. We want to make sure that organizations worldwide can use this. So we've open sourced it. We want to make sure that you can level up your threat modeling game and that you can use this. So it's available. We've deployed this on a GitHub repository in Markdown files so that you can easily reuse those. Now here I can only present the slides, but you can go to the GitHub repository yourself. The idea here is that you're free to use it. We hope to get some feedback from you to see what works, to see also how we can improve the next version. Here's again the link to the Threat Modeling Playbook. We've also created an OWASP Threat Model project around it. So in the end, download it, use it, let us know what works for you. Also, I'm pretty sure that some aspects might not work for you, and from there we'll learn and we'll take the input of everyone within the, I would say, the community to collaborate on the next release together with you and any OWASP volunteers that want to work on this. Because we're really convinced that having not a standardized, but a practical step-by-step playbook will help a lot of organizations to get better at threat modeling, and that will help us all improve product security, and that's what we're in for it. So with that, I open the floor for any questions you might have.
Cool. Before we start the questions, let's give Seba a big round of applause for his talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seba. That was a really good introduction to both threat modeling and how to introduce it into your organization. I've got one question from an online viewer. Sean asks, this playbook covers an organization-wide initiative, e.g. it advocates hiring a threat modeling specialist. Does the playbook cover how to start small with a single project to demonstrate ROI?
It's in essence the playbook can be applied on smaller organizations or even like one dev team and with one product. Obviously, it's I would say you will not do it as formally as the playbook describes, but the steps will basically be the same. And the threat modeling specialist might be someone within the team who reads up on it and I would say specializes in this. It doesn't really require you to hire a full-time person for this. That's absolutely not the goal here. But you should have, or you should try to, I would say, internalize some kind of knowledge on threat modeling, and that's the key idea of the threat modeling specialist in the playbook here.
Cool. Thanks, Seba. Is there any questions from the room that I can relay? Okay, well, then it's time to wrap up this session. Thank you very much, Seba, for connecting to us. I know it's very late where you are, and we appreciate you doing this presentation. Thank you again. No
problem. I also would like to thank a couple of people that worked on this. Also, have a look at it online, and I've also put in my contact details, both my OWASP and Toreon contact details. If you want to learn more about threat modeling, we regularly release a Threat Modeling Insider newsletter. Link is here, and we're also doing from time to time some online trainings in these COVID times. So you're more than welcome to have a look at them as well.
Cool. Thank you very much, Seba.
All right. Thank you. And enjoy the conference.